Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. I'm your co-host, Jerad Lee.
And I just had an overwhelming urge to shout, "Oh, no, you're not." I'm Ben
And that
Rose.
voice is Ben Rose, the other co-host.
Sorry, we've been having a good laugh in the pre-recording session, but we are here for another serious
I
episode
have an
of...
existential doubt in my own existence now.
Yeah. Welcome to the Reinsurance Podcast, a very serious business charting podcast about reinsurance.
You can tell why we're as we're sort of approaching the end of the summer and into the autumn, it's for many people in the industry the favorite time of year, right? It's Christmas for reinsurance, which is festival season, or in our industry, conference season.
Christmas for reinsurance. I love this characterization.
But
so, analogy.
We've talked about the sort of industry conferences in the past, and we're approaching the first sort of big one in Europe, which is Monte-Carlo, one of your and my both favorite.
And just like Christmas, I'm going to try and run with this. It's an occasion which sees the whole family get together, including extended family. In other words, people who have long-term relationships with each other and may or may not like each other that much, but make the effort once a year to all gather in a geographically sensible location and put up with each other over lots of meals and drinking for a reasonable period.
It is a strong analogy.
Yeah. There's less gift giving and sort of religious background context, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it's a start.
You could also make context of wealthy old white guys with a bunch of presents to give other people or similar if we went so far into the analogy, but we shall cease it there, I suspect.
So, to start us off, let's talk about conferencing in reinsurance in general.
Yeah.
Why do we even conference in reinsurance?
Yeah, it sort of stems back. We've talked a ton on this podcast about the importance of relationships and these types of things, but you look at the reliance on relationships as an industry and the fact that as a global industry, people are sort of distributed globally, and it's very difficult to sort of centralize all of those meetings in a really effective way. So you probably know, Ben certainly has researched the originating conference in the industry, but it was a way in which you could centralize, let's bring all the buyers of reinsurance and all the sellers of reinsurance and all their broker intermediaries all together, and we can sort of run around getting a sense as to what's happening in the market, what people are buying, and sort of make that a bit more efficient than to sort of traveling to Zurich and then to Munich and then to Hanover, and so on and so forth. So I think that's probably the origin story of it, but there's probably a more launching of the first one that you might know.
No, absolutely, and I think they have become a regional theme. You have Monte-Carlo, then Baden-Baden, and then Singapore coming up after that as well as, of course, a whole host of conferences happening in North America too. Yeah. But I guess the other aspect that, again, extends that Christmas analogy is the seasonality, because this period of year, I think, is and always has been fascinating for the market, because it's not only the right time to start floating ideas, structures, giving updates, etc., about where everyone's at going into the run-up to 1st of January renewal season, but also it's right in the middle of hurricane season. Yep. So it tends to be the moment when people are sort of seeing events happen live and reacting to them and gossiping, and it becomes a really important window for sharing immediate reflections on, what's that going to do to where we sit going in, and then the other conferences then almost have other roles to play as you go further through the season, right? So the Baden-Baden meeting is normally when, for some clients, they like to have, put out firm order terms. For others, it's a bit later. They might like to have started getting quotes by Baden-Baden, etc. But people start to use these as milestone events in the run-up.
Yeah, and there's a lot of preparation in that run-up around scheduling the agendas and organizing kind of what your talking points are going to be, and prioritizing the partnerships that you want to have to sort of anchor first, so you can then go through the rest of the conference with sort of, I have reaffirmed the position I'm taking on this, and now as I go through. So there's a lot of jostling for what that schedule looks like in the work you prepare in the build up to the event, to sort of help evaluate and assess whether you're on the right page, or you're going to make additional calibrations before the other conferences, as well as in the build up to 1/1. We'll talk more, I think, later on in the episode about some of the anecdotes around watching hurricanes and events during Monte Carlo, which is sort of a big one there. But before we talk about the other conferences in that, let's sort of dive into Monaco and Monte Carlo and the sort of advent of this particular conference.
Yeah, and I think whenever we talk about this, outsiders especially, I made them sound really like xenophobic kind of reaction there, didn't I? Outsiders to the reinsurance industry, which may include, listeners to this podcast. We do have a lot of mindfulness rankings, apparently. Yeah. Soothing voices and all that jazz. But basically, why they always want to know why on earth, and insiders too, why on earth are they doing this conference in Monaco, in Monte Carlo? That seems, one, like a really expensive and flashy place to do it for an industry with a very high expense ratio. And I don't know why I said one, I haven't really got two. That's just part one. Why are we doing it in a place that's so expensive?
It's an interesting one. So Monaco, as Monte Carlo, people might know, famous for the casino and Casino Royale for 007 fans, as well as for the Monaco Grand Prix. So it's very much centralized, this sort of pocket of Europe that has this tight condensation. And now that city is actually very, very famous for conferences more than just reinsurance. You have like a worldwide yacht conference that happens there, and you have all these like big events that they've sort of centralized. Essentially, the way this economy thrives is sort of by delivering these massive events.
Is it like the dentists who are there the week before reinsurance?
It's or after? Very possible. Someone surely knows this.
And also, I was going to sing the Casino Royale song, but I can't remember. It was too many films ago. Oh well, I can just hear Skyfall in my head, which is irrelevant and distracting.
But I don't know what the original genesis of why Monte Carlo became like one of. So this is now the 66th Monte.
Based on our napkin math.
Yeah, exactly.
That is our understanding since 1957 was the first ever Monte Carlo rendezvous.
Has our math included the 2 years hiatus due to COVID?
That's true. We haven't. So maybe they changed the count. So maybe this is actually the 64th.
In 66.
But it's been last year being the 63rd, and then it was just a 2-year gap since the 62nd. Interesting. But let us not interrupt the flow of the prior narrative, because we were about to discover why it started in Monte Carlo all those years ago in the 1950s. I feel like I need an adjective there, the swinging 50s, but that's definitely the wrong decade. Yeah. Whatever the 50s were. Take yourself back there and imagine a bunch of reinsurance people who are trying to figure out where they should all get together prior to renewals. And apparently the reason for Monaco being selected was because it was kind of like Switzerland, but not Switzerland. It's genuinely what it seems to have been down to if you look at the history pages. It was like Switzerland conceptually, in that it was a very neutral place, except because Switzerland is full of insurance companies. It was not like Switzerland because actually at the time there were no dedicated Monaco-based insurance companies, and therefore it was a very neutral and convenient location in the middle of Europe. And much like the London market, for example, during the rest of the year, it had a sufficient density of hotels and conference centres and so on, all built around each other, that you could have for a given week of the year or near enough, a whole industry. 3,000 people, I think, go to this conference every year, descend upon the city, all have somewhere to stay, and all be able to walk to all their various meetings all over the city. I think the Café de Paris is still closed this year, sadly.
Is it again closed this year?
I think so, yeah. The refurbishments are scheduled to finish like the week after we get there or something.
Yeah, just in time for those dentists to show up.
Exactly. But this, apart from that sad part, everything is pretty much built and ready for 3,000 reinsurance professionals to descend upon it and figure out what they're going to do this renewal season.
So let's then dive into kind of what does it look like. So everyone, the descension has happened. Everyone has arrived. People have taken they've flown over. There's once you can land in Nice and then take a car. People will helicopter. Quite a lot of reinsurance professionals will then take the helicopter from Nice to Monaco, which is one of the many status symbols that begins to emerge. You have all the various hotels across Monaco, as you mentioned. So you have a bunch of famous ones. The execs will sometimes rent out the penthouses for the various conferences and sort of holding court, if you will. Not cheap. We have some of the numbers. I was watching something the other night. Some of the penthouses will be 75 grand a night. But I mean, if you're hosting the C-suite of a big broker, a big reinsurer for all of your meetings for 4 days, just cost of doing business in Monaco.
Yeah, indeed. That's something that we grapple with as a re-insurtech.
Yeah, exactly.
Not having a multi-billion-dollar balance sheet and going to these conferences. Yeah. But no, certainly. I mean, maybe we can give our listeners as an idea. But like, can you remember from having approved expenses last time how much like a sandwich was?
Oh, it's definitely not light on the budget. If you go to the restaurants in the hotels, salad and a Coke is 45 euros, something like this. So you're certainly paying to be there, and it's sort of the cost in the aggregate is quite significant. But delegations from firms like Aon will easily spend upwards of a few $1 million over the course of the week to fly everyone out there and put everyone out.
Branded cars, don't they? Have all sorts of things.
Yep. So Tiger Risk did branded cars a couple years back. I think there's some other firms that have done something similar. Some firms, I think the insurer drives a black car from London. They have like a black cab. A black cab, yeah. They'll brand out a black cab and drive that all the way through and buzz that around the city. So
I saw a black cab on top of Alpe d'Huez the other day.
Did you?
Yeah, I was very confused.
Yeah.
It was not operational, as it turned out. But it was one of the new ones. It was one of the electric ones. Yeah. Not an old one.
Yeah.
Very confused.
So it's kind of like a spectacle. It's all much of this whole event is like a spectacle.
I thought you meant the black cab on top of the Alpe. No, sorry. Yes, it's very much a spectacle.
Yeah. And so once you're there, then the way the diaries sort of shake out is you sort of schedule these sort of 30-minute meetings, and everyone runs around and has these sort of short 30-minute meetings across throughout their day. The Café de Paris is quite famous because there's a huge number of tables that people will rent out there, and then people sort of rotate through. So you'll have 5 or 6 Aon tables or 5 or 6 Gallagher tables, whoever it might be. And then people sort of just rotate through in these little 30-minute meetings.
I've come up with a theory.
Have you?
You've paused because you saw me thinking.
I did.
In this sort of thinking
It was the theory generation face that I've gotten to know so well.
Is part of the continued appeal of expensive Monte-Carlo its expensiveness. And my reason for positing this theory is that actually it's attractive because of its expensiveness, not despite its expensiveness, because of the exclusivity that generates. Because a lot of conferences and things, if it's cheap to go, companies will send huge numbers of their workforce. Whereas, as we know, these big brokers, they, especially big reinsurers, etc., they can't afford to send everybody to Monte Carlo because the bills mount so quickly. Accommodation, food, wine, the lot gets really, really quite expensive, and as a result, actually, it does feel, relative to the other conferences, I would say, like it's more the top level execs who would go to Monte Carlo versus other conferences. Would you agree?
I would agree with that. And I think certainly it's all the biggest names are there every year. Yeah. And that exclusivity is absolutely part of that. I also think whether you're a broker or a reinsurer, and probably cedents as well, there's a point in your career when you get invited for the first time, and it does feel like that graduation moment of going to the big kids table, right? Right? Is this, you've now made it, so you've gotten an invite, and because the aggregate spend for any individual person is quite significant. So there's certainly a piece there, and I think as a result of that, there's this real appreciation and value of like the history of it. And again, we've talked about this on episodes about London and Lloyd's and similar, where the industry really values the right way, in sort of very aggressive air quotes, to do these types of things. And it is going with clients and sort of taking them to all the different partners in one location, then having a nice dinner on the Riviera or similar, like afterwards. And this part of the spectacle is the right way to entertain the most important clients and the biggest events and these types of things. And this is why you see the conference sort of done the way it's done. There isn't a networking app for this conference. Mark Gagan said it the other day in a LinkedIn post. There's a aversion to modernity, or this sort of real reticence to adopt and try to make it more efficient. And they were looking at maybe even trying to schedule 15-minute meetings, which that was the genesis of this argument.
He did seem quite upset about that.
Yeah.
If you're listening, Mark, you did seem very, very distressed by this.
Friend of the podcast, though, Mark.
Yeah, no. Like, that's why I was addressing him directly.
Yeah.
Mark, if you have. You seemed very, very upset. I was a little bit tempted to send you a meeting request just to see if I would receive some of that wrath.
But that's because this is how this group wants to know. Like when you arrive, the other thing we've not mentioned is when you sign up for the conference, you register with where you're staying, and you get into the book. And the book has every attendee and the hotel that they're staying and their contact details, and people can sort of flip through this then. And it's this way of you use this and use it for future conferences, and you sort of schedule your meetings at these various hotel locations and similar in a way that it's like the quote unquote, again, right way to do it, where I have scheduled this time in your diary and I'm going to walk to the Hotel de Paris and we're going to find a little couch in the corner of this massive lobby and have this event and have this 30-minute catch up.
Yeah, it was nice. I remember many years ago in the early days of Riskbook, when we were debating whether we could be featured in the program with the tent on the campsite in a field somewhat near to Monte-Carlo, because way back when that wasn't an option. But we have been going regularly to all industry conferences ever sort of since they were put back on, right? So you guys were there last year.
Yep.
I rocked up on the final day, fresh off my honeymoon, which was delightful, although I came in a bit overeager, I think, off the back of the good honeymoon vibes, and the next morning was less fresh. But it is very much a all day after a certain, lazy listen to a session in the morning kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Meetings all the way through the afternoon and early evening, and then dinners and various parties. Like famously, I don't know what will happen this year. I don't want to announce anything that hasn't been announced, but I know certainly there used to be parties held even at 2 a.m. in the morning as like the start time. And then there would be an after party beyond that as well, with people mixing from all over the industry. So it really is a incredible combination of structured meetings followed by fresh, meeting new people. But it does take a bit of endurance, I would say, to get through it all.
Well, it's an interesting dichotomy that you highlight there, because you're right. The most of your day is filled in these like 30-minute slots, and then sort of post dinner, it's like a free for all for the next 6 hours. And
then Jerad books from 8 a.m. for the next morning.
There, I did have a very early panel last year, which I got in at like 4:35 a.m. and had to be at the panel at 8 a.m. So it was a bit of a
valuable business networking.
Indeed. But we mentioned at the start earlier in the podcast, the sort of watching the industry evolve, or watching events happen, and sort of real time assessment around things that impact reinsurance whilst you're at this sort of one of the most impactful events of the year. So hurricane season being the one that's sort of always on the cards as we sort of watch various storms come through, or look at storms that are sort of beginning to brew as people are there. But I was talking to someone last year, and they were talking about they were in Monte-Carlo on the 11th of September in 2001. And that was still harken back to 2001, when if events were to happen, you would then roll a TV from somewhere. Like, this isn't, these aren't like, right. There's no monitors, there's no flat screens hanging on walls and stuff, right?
Nobody'd be watching it on their smartphones.
No. So all of a sudden, the sort of word came out this was happening, and someone had rolled one of those. You can picture this, right? That sort of like multi-tiered metal black cart that has that sort of TV that's 36 inches deep. But they rolled that into a couple of the restaurants, and sort of the whole industry is now gathered around this 32-inch TV on watching what everyone knew at the time was like going to transform how the insurance industry was going to operate. Like even then, within hours, people knowing this was going to have a huge impact on all future travel, potentially massive complications and confusion around how these property claims play out, not even to mention whether it was going to be a terrorist attack and war and all the things that sort of came off the back of that. But those are the kind of things that when you have such a condensation of industry expertise around that. It's really an interesting dynamic when you see something big really happening, because it begins to be the talk of the whole conference.
Absolutely. I think it'd be interesting to see this year with, the live events sort of happening relatively close by. I mean, we've had Adalia, we're not quite at the peak.
Yep.
We're just, by the time this goes out, we'll be just at the peak of the season. So
Yeah.
we've been warned many times this is expected to be a above average season. The sea is warmer
Yeah.
than normal, and so things are brewing
Yep.
out there in them seas. So we'll see what actually comes through. But
We should have, as a slight pivot away from the hard, dark conversations of 9/11 and the difficulty with that on the industry, but we should do something with things that people do during catastrophes that are just stupid, like kind of like a Darwin Award type thing. So
firing bullets into the hurricane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Have you got lots of those examples?
Well, there was one I saw the other day.
Okay.
We don't have time for this to be in a news episode, but there's this weather reporter out in the hurricane. It's like gusts, it's just the weather is wild. And then behind them, there's these two guys on one of those like inflatable unicorns, like in paddles. So they're like, well, the streets are all flooded. I can't drive anywhere. So their route to get to where they're going is to take this inflatable unicorn with like boat paddles down the street during this hurricane.
Heavy, reliable, safe
Yeah,
vessel.
yeah. So it's these kind of things that just add some enjoyment and color to hurricane season as the industry watches it. But
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
What have we missed on the Monte Carlo coverage so far? I feel like we had a as we always do. We had a plan. And
no, I've thought of it.
Go.
I've thought of something. Okay. Now, the main thing that listeners should take away from this important episode is, well, first of all, that Supercede will be there. Jared won't be there, sadly.
I won't be there this year.
Got
No, I'll be in
Prettier
America.
date in the US.
Yeah.
Gone off elsewhere. But in Jared's place, we are bringing back those aggressive quotation marks, yacht.
Yes.
From which the Reinsurance Podcast will be recording a bunch of mini episodes with special guests.
Yeah.
And I've been told we have to promote not only the opportunity to be on the boat, but to come and see the boat, because our design team has lovingly created a Supercede pirate flag for the yacht, which up until literally, a few days ago, I was going to be carrying all the way there from a trip, because I'm awkwardly, again, coming in from somewhere else. So I've got like a ton of bags going to Africa for a horse riding holiday. And then Cordy was like, can you also take this flag? And I was like, oh, that seems all right. How big is it? It turned out it's this huge base the size of a hold luggage suitcase with a pole that's taller than me. And we're like, luckily, we're posting it in advance. If it doesn't arrive, blame the postal things. But as far as we know, it should be there by the time you're listening to this, and you should be able to go see it in the harbour.
But you're not taking the boat from Africa to Nice. You're going to fly at least some part of that trip, I hope.
Some of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sort of a mixture of riding and flying.
If Ben's there with like those sort of blisters you get from like 40 days at sea, you can tell that he's had to take the yacht the entire way. But no.
I don't know how the yacht is getting there. I don't know if it's always there and we've just borrowed it, or whether we imported it. I'm not close to these things. I've just been told that we've commandeered a vessel.
But it will be the next section of episodes of the Reinsurance Podcast on tour. Ooh. The Reinsurance Podcast at sea. We'll work.
You've done it. No, that's great. I love it.
But so we'll work on
the Reinsurance Podcast at sea. That's really quite catchy. It doesn't spell anything. Repass. No.
Yeah, what's it?
Trespass. The Reinsurance Podcast at sea. Trespass. Sort of works.
Yeah, but you shouldn't trespass. You should ask for permission before you board yachting vessels.
Wonderful. I think that's been a wonderful tour of the Monte-Carlo Rendezvous.
Yeah.
You'll see the fruits of our recording efforts there in no time, I'm sure, and hopefully we'll have time to publish them all before Baden-Baden and when it all kicks off again. Yeah.
Well, we'll do a Monte Carlo recap episode, or part of the news, I'm sure. We'll do the same with Baden-Baden. So we'll sort of circle back on these. And then there's also forthcoming white paper that we'll be launching whilst in Monte-Carlo. So
yes, of course.
if you're listening to this en route to or in preparation of your Monte-Carlo trip, make sure to go to our website and get the updated white paper all about the impact of bad data on your reinsurance pricing, all of that coming soon. So super exciting time as we go into the beginning of conference season.
Yeah, do look out for that white paper. We've had amazing support from all over the industry, with tons of reinsurance people getting involved and sharing their stories, their experiences, and helping us understand what they do when they receive bad data. And some of the findings have been, mind-blowing. So yeah, really excited to
and
share.
for many of our listeners who did contribute, thank you directly from us on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Direct thank you from us here.
And we look forward to sharing your words back with you.
You'll be like, that sounds familiar. It does indeed.
Indeed.
But until next time, thanks everybody.
Yeah, we'll give you the familiar sound of the Reinsurance Podcast outro music. Goodbye.